Hey guys, so I'm going to be going over lighting and rendering today in PowerPoint form, and then I'm going to be uploading a video on actually lighting and rendering inside of Maya. So let's make a start. So the learning outcomes for today is to be able to understand lighting concepts, be able to understand how to light in Maya, be able to understand rendering concepts, what is rendering, and then be able to understand how to render from Maya. So this learning outcome 2 and 4 I'll be showing you in a different video, but this PowerPoint's about learning outcome 1 and 3. So first of all, lighting. What is lighting? Obviously, because I'm not in a classroom right now, I'll answer this. Lighting is basically, when we see things, we're not actually seeing objects. All we are seeing is rays of light. We are seeing light information. Even though you can touch and feel on a 3D object, all our eyes are registering is light. So in order to see things, they have to be reflecting light into our eyes. So obviously, the next question, why do we need to light things? It's so that we can see it. Even though you model inside of Maya, you can still see it because Maya's got a default lighting system. Now, in terms of the problems that lighting can cause, it really does depend, but if you're using very, very soft shadows, to get them very good quality, they can take a long time to render. So render time can dramatically increase when you're, doing your lighting. And finally, what is 3-point lighting? This is something we're going to touch on in a few slides' time. But 3-point lighting essentially is a lighting setup done with 3 lights, which are your key light, your fill light, and your backlight, but I will touch on that later. First of all, though, I've got a little video to show you, so I'll go ahead and give this a play, and then we'll have a chat. Okay, so from that video, you can see how dramatic the effect of lighting can have. When she moved her hand in front of her face, it could, if in normal lighting circumstances, it may have looked perfectly innocent, but the shadow that was casting on her face, it looked very dark, very creepy. So just by the position of lights and the color and intensity of lights, it's very, 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 effective. You can create loads of different moods and tones and atmospheres with different lights. So 3-point lighting. As I said, 3-point lighting is a lighting setup done with 3 lights, which are your key light. Now this is the main light source, so this is the strongest light. And then your fill light is used in order to fill in the shadowy areas. You don't want it to be in complete shadow, you want a little bit of light there. So it's a very dim light, which is why this is grey. And now your backlight, if we're taking, this is a person for example, your backlight, what it does is it lights the edges of their hair, the back of their hair, the sort of edge around their shoulders, and it just makes them sort of separated from their background. This helps a lot, because you do this in real life as well. This helps a lot in green screening, make the target sort of stand out from the green screen. So yeah, it separates it from the background is what the backlight does. It's also called a separation light. So again, here's another example. Here's your camera. Say you're filming somebody. You've got your backlight to make them sort of be separated from the background. Your key light is your main light source, and your fill light fills in those shadowy, dark areas. So in terms of where it's, we can see this being used in film and TV. So a screenshot from Chuck here. Your key light, obviously the main sort of source of light on the left side of his face by here. And even though the right side is in sort of shadowy areas, there would have been some dim sort of light just lighting them up just a little bit, and that is your fill light. And you can see round the sort of outside, on the top of his shoulder by here, and the tops of his hair, and just round his sort of neck by here, that is the backlight. It separates him from the background, so you can see the background is a sort of grey wall, and he definitely pops out from there. You can definitely see that depth. Another example, here's an example of it being used in Tangled. So you can see it's used in real life, and it's used also in CG or animation, So you've got your key light as the main light source being cast on his face by here, and then even though his face, the right side of his face is in shadow, there would have been some sort of light source, very, very dim, just brightening it up just that little bit. And it's labelled rim light here, but a rim or separation or backlight it's the same thing. You can just see that it's lighting the sort of edges by there to make him sort of pop out just that little bit. Okay, so first of all, before I tell you how lights work in Maya, it's important that we know how lighting works in the real world. So if you're looking at a car outside, the only reason you can see that car is because some sort of light is bouncing off it. Let's say it's a sunny day. Sunlight is going to come down, travel all the way from the sun. These little photons, which are sort of light particles, travel all the way from the sun, bounce off that car and back into your eye, and that's the only way you are seeing that car. If it's dark outside, you've got moonlight and street lamps, and the photons will leave, light particles will leave the light, will leave the moon, bounce off the car and then back into your eye, and that is the only way we are seeing things, those little photon light particles. So bearing that in mind, our lights in Maya emit photons, just like all light sources do. They're little light particles. Those then go and hit the object, they bounce off whatever you've modelled, and then they bounce back into the sort of CG camera that you create inside of Maya. And it's exactly the same when you're taking a photo. So think of it, when you've got your camera in Maya, which you're rendering your model through, it's exactly the same as going outside, taking a picture of something, because the photons come from the sun, bounce off the object, and go back into the camera lens. The same thing happens with your camera inside of Maya. That's how lights work. So there's actually 6 types of lights in Maya, but I'm only going to go over 4 of them today. Those 4 lights are an area light, a directional light, ambient light, and a spotlight. So let's have a look at each one. So area lights, used if you're doing still renders. If you're doing still renders, they'll often be used for still renders because they give very, very, high quality reflections and shadows. They're very, very nice. However, the issue in using area lights in, say you're doing a VFX shot which is 300 frames long, which is 12 seconds, at 25 frames per second, then you've got an issue of that you've got high quality reflections and shadows, but the render time to render a frame, it may take about 50 seconds, and then the problem would be that 50 times 300 is quite a lot. So it has to render 300 single images, and it takes 50 seconds per image. So the only issue with area lights is they can give you long render times. Depending on what how you manage your time, that could be alright. You may have enough time for that, but quite often you might not. So now let's look at directional lights. So these lights are used for light sources that are far away, stuff like the sun, the moon, maybe starlight. Maybe a rocket explodes in orbit or something, and massive fireball in the sky, and you can use directional lights for that because it's mainly used for light sources that are far away. So photons, your directional light is made up of a set of arrows, and whatever direction you can rotate it and everything, whatever direction those arrows are pointing, that's where those photons, which I talked about earlier, that's the direction they are shot out in. So ambient light, this is used very much for kind of artificial light sources. You can experiment as much as you want, and say you want the sun to be an ambient light. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. There's no reason why you can't. Very used for sort of artificial light sources, lamps and stuff like that. It's basically, when you create one, it's a sphere which has got loads of sort of lines dashing out of it, and it shines light evenly in all directions. Now the spotlight, this is just like in theatre. It's a cone of light, so a circle of light, just like when you go to watch a ballet and there's a spotlight, being moved by somebody around a sort of dancing figure. It's just like that, just like in theatre, so it only shines within a certain circle. So this can be useful if you're doing something like, if you're animating a character walking along with a torch, and so obviously that needs a sort of cone of light. Maybe if you've got some sort of lamp or something, you may want to use ambient light, but yeah, you could also use that if you want sort of just a circle of light. Okay, so we'll have a look at some settings now that most lights kind of have. Some of them don't have all of these, but I'll talk you through them. So intensity, that's just how strong the light is. So, you know, default is 1, but I've gone up to sort of 1.2 million before. I'll explain why I've turned it up to that later on when I talk about fall off and decay. So color, obviously you can change the color of lights, and so that's intensity. You know, you have dimmer switches in some houses, that's the intensity, how bright it is, and then color. Now fall off and decay, so some lights, what they do, just like when photons leave the sun, if you were standing 2 miles in front of the sun, as well as being disintegrated by the heat, if you weren't, then, you know, you'd be blinded as soon as you wouldn't even open your eyes, and you would be blinded. It's so bright. But obviously, as those photons travel further and further away from the sun, they get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And the exact same thing happens when you've got any street lamp. Further away you get, the photons leave, and as soon as they leave, they start losing energy rapidly. So what fall off and decay means, it's at what rate those kind of photons lose their energy. And when you turn this on, your lights inside of Maya, you may be like, well, it's not lighting anything now, but that's when you turn your intensity up to, you know, start on 1,000 or 10,000, because your fall off, you know, the photons will leave and they'll just, you know, die straight away, so you'll then need to up your intensity a lot. But that's how lighting works in the real world, so it's worth doing it. And the final bit is casting shadows. Now, there's in the lights inside of Maya, there's an option to either use depth map shadows or use ray trace shadows. Because I'm going to be teaching you mental ray, you're going to want to be clicking use ray trace shadows, and it's just enabling the renderer to, you know, render shadows. But I'll be going through that more in software. Any light source you have, they all create shadows, so you'll want to make sure it's ticked. So I've just got a few images here actually. I really like these. This one, you can see the sort of God rays shining through this underwater scene. It's very nice light in here. And this one I like as well. You can see there's only one light source. So for this, you know, you wouldn't have had to have done 3-point lighting, because I think the only light source is the light coming in through the window, but then the light bounces round, obviously, which is why sort of this area is lit. And then this one's very nice as well. I like the shadows of the leaves. I think it's very nice. So yeah, this is just some examples of, imagine if there was no lighting in here, it was just Maya's default lighting, it would look really naff. But you know, this is very, very nice. So, I'll quickly have a quick chat about rendering. So, let's go through these. Okay, what is rendering? Basically, rendering is, if you were to go and watch the new Tangled or Frozen film in cinema, you would not expect somebody to open a Maya file on a cinema screen and then just click play, would you? No. Basically, whatever you do inside of Maya, whether it's just a still model which you're modeling, or whether you're doing an animation, it needs to be exported. Now, when you think about it, any video you watch runs at either 25 or sort of 30 frames per second. Now, when we're talking about British film and TV, we're talking about 25 frames per second. So what that means is 25 image. When you go to the cinema, you're watching 25 images per second played just after each other, and you're not actually watching a movie file or anything. You're watching 25 images just after each other in quick succession, and it looks like movement. That's how stop motion works. Now, what we do inside of Maya is, if we've got an animation, say we want it to be 5 seconds long, 5 times 25 images per second is 125. So you need to render 125 single images, which you would then take into something like After Effects or Premiere and play it back, and it'll look like movement. Isn't like an optical illusion. So what rendering is exporting each frame as an image from Maya, and there's a lot of things that you need to think about when you're rendering. So I've got up here Name Me a Renderer. This is from when I was doing it in class, but if you think of if you think back to that class, maybe try and pause it and have a go. But I'll name some now. You've got Maya software own renderer. It's not very. It's awful. It's not just not very good. It's awful. You've got Mental Ray, which I'll be teaching you, but there's also stuff like Arnold Renderer, Renderman Renderer, Octane Renderer, Clarice. There's lots of renderers out there. V-Ray as well is another one. I think I can't remember Houdini's Mantra. Mantra is the renderer in Houdini, so that's Mantra. So why do we need to render? Obviously, as I said in the example, you wouldn't expect, if you wanted to show someone, you know, your short film in an interview, you wouldn't want to open up Maya, because also you save, if you're doing a short film animation, short 3D animation film, then, you know, you'd have them saved as separate scenes. You wouldn't want to have to open a scene, play it. Oh, that's 2 seconds. Okay, let's go open the next Maya file. You need to render so you can, you know, finalize that animation or that still image if it's just a model. Now, what problems can rendering cause? And the main one that sticks out here is time. A lot of time. But it also presents you, when you're rendering, with a lot of complex settings, okay? I'm not going to go too deep into them in this video or the video inside of Maya, but I'm just going to give you an introduction. So, basically, I'll show you how rendering works inside of Maya. So, what does a renderer do? Basically, it takes a 3D scene and compresses it into a 2D image. So, when you go outside with your camera, say you're in the forest or some woods, and you're with your camera and you think, right, I want to take a picture of all these trees moving off into the distance. Those are 3D objects in a sort of 3D environment, but when you click capture on your camera and take a photo of it, it looks at all that 3D environment and compresses it into a 2D image, and that's exactly what rendering does. With your camera inside of Maya, it looks at your 3D scene, does a lot of calculations like light, you know, to get the lighting right and everything. Does a lot of calculations and then compresses that 3D scene into a 2D image. I've already gone through what different renderers there are. Just to recap, there's Mental Ray, V-Ray, Renderman, Arnold Renderer, Octane, Clarice, Mantra, but you know, not all of the ones I just mentioned you get in Maya. The one we're going to be concerned about and learning is Mental Ray. It's a nice one to learn, because once you understand how that works, it's a lot easier to understand how all the others work and how to use them. So I'm not going to show you this video right now. I'm going to skip over it, but if you wanted to watch it, we watched this one in class and some of the others by this guy in class. It's very good. If you go to YouTube and type in rendering, rasterization, ray tracing and radiosity, just that title by here, if you go in and type that into YouTube or just search for online media tutor, it's very, very good. It's very good. So you can watch that if you want to. So inside of Maya, you've got, I will be showing you this in software, but you've got these 4 images. You've got this first one, which is a clapperboard with an eye on it. All this does when you click this is it opens your render view, which I will go over in a second. Now the next clapperboard is just a blank clapperboard, and all this does is it then takes that 3D scene, it kind of takes a picture of it and compresses it into a 2D view, which you will see in your render view. So the first icon, this opens your render view. This actually renders the 3D scene. And then the last, I'll go over IPR another time with you guys. It's not that complex, to be honest, but this last one I want you to learn, really, is render settings. So it's the clapperboard with a cog on there, which universally means settings. So yeah, this is your render settings, where you can adjust all the quality settings, all that stuff. So here is the Maya render view. What you need to remember here is, first of all, this drop down here, which I can't obviously click now, I'll be showing you in software anyway. This is the renderer that you select. Now by default it'll use Maya software, but we would click in here and make sure Mental Ray is selected. Obviously you've got your clapperboard here, so if this is just completely black, there's nothing there, you can click it to render your, I actually clicked it then, went to the next slide, but you can click it to render your current scene. For now, the only other thing I want you to remember is this image by here looks like an attachment to an email, you know, just a file icon. What this does, if you click that, it keeps the render that you've just done, and then say you've moved a light or turned the intensity down because you thought it was too bright, you can then render again, and then there'll be a scroll bar at the bottom so you can see before and after. And what a good lighting and rendering artist will do is they'll move the lights around, they'll alter the render settings and they have like loads of images along the bottom with a scroll bar, so you can see where they've come from and what they've finally got to. It's like a sort of before and after. You can kind of see, did that work, turn that light down, or did it not work, you know, stuff like that. So here is the, you know, the clapperboard with a little cog by it. This brings you to a window like this where you can alter your render settings. Now obviously you can choose your renderer here, so render using Maya software. No, we will be using Mental Ray all of the time. The only similarity between the render settings of Maya software and Mental Ray is this common tab. This is where you can select, you know, file name prefix. That means what file name are you going to give it? What do you want your render to be called? So it could be a series of 50 images, so it'll be called my animation _1, my animation _2, and there'll be 50 of those images. Underneath you've got the image format. Do you want it to be TIFFs? Yes, you do. For this module, we'll be going into EXR files next year, but you'll want to change this to TIFF images. Again, I'll be going through all of this later, so I'll just skip through for now. Now, the reason we learn Mental Ray is, as I said, it's a good one to learn because you learn a lot through it, and then you are able to pick up all kind of other kind of renderers. Once you know how this one works, it's a lot easier to learn the others. It can be quite complex and comprehensive, but don't worry, you're going to be absolutely fine. I'm going to do an actual in-software tutorial on how to use Mental Ray, so don't worry about that at all. Now, there's one last thing that I'm going to go through, and that is image-based lighting. So, this is something that's used primarily in VFX. I know you said in very good VFX, but it is very good for VFX. It's very realistic. So what it does is, say you've modelled, for example, a rocket, and I wanted it to touch down in a park. What I would do is I would take my camera and I would take a series of images and stitch them together to make what we have here. These are panoramas. This is like a 360 view. You can do these with your iPhones as well. It's quite incredible. You know, you just click the photo and then you move it, and it takes a series of images, stitches them together into this. And so, say you've got your, you know, a static spaceship just on the ground. What image-based lighting does is, once you've made this panorama, it puts a massive sphere around your model, and then on the inside, because the model is inside that sphere, on the inside of the sphere, it'll put this image on the inside, and then it'll light your model using the pixel data from each of, you know, spheres are made out of those vertexes. From each vertex, it'll emit, you know, the sort of color pixels, so it'll emit all the blues from the sky, all these whites, and all these greens from the grass underneath it. So the underneath of your spaceship will be kind of lit, sort of tinted just that little bit green, and then the top of it will be sort of tinted that little bit bright white, bright blue. So then it'll look exactly like it should. It's very realistic and it's very good for VFX. And again, I'll be showing you how to actually do this inside of Maya in Mental Ray. Here's another panorama. Yeah, the reason we don't use Maya software is because it's not very good, Maya's own renderer. It doesn't give you nice renders, and there's not a lot of options to, you know, increase the quality. You can get some decent things out of it, but Mental Ray gives you such a much better result. The difference between them is crazy. You will be using Mental Ray, not Maya software. Maya software isn't, in comparison to Mental Ray, it's awful. So that just about does it for this presentation. What I'm going to do now is, you know, I'll upload a video on how to actually use Mental Ray. So catch me up in that, and then we'll get you rendering in no time. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.